Hey, welcome everybody. HSC Podcast number 10. Here we are back in prime time. Got Big Box Steve on the mic, joined by Derek, the Big Smooth. So today we're going to take a little bit of break from everything going on in the world, take a little bit a step back to original HSC, talk about the NFL because we got some cool things happening in the NFL. We got free agency opening. We just had the combine. Yeah, trades going down. For me, this is like the beginning of the season, even though we don't get the season until it happens so much later. But I really feel like this is an exciting time for the NFL right now because all these moves happening and kind of seeing what the season's going to look like. So, first thing we want to talk about here, though, before we get into tonight's topics, I want to talk about one thing real quick because I'm sure you've heard this or seen this. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. It's been a hot topic. So the Rams win the Super Bowl, right? Good for the Rams. Stafford gets his first Super Bowl after a terrible run in Detroit. Not always his fault, right? He's always been a decent quarterback. But the Rams are a good team. They have a lot of great players. They were primed to have a good season anyway. They add OBJ. They add Von Miller. Weddle comes back out of retirement to play in the playoffs. The question I have, or what keeps coming up, which I just don't understand, is what do you think about this? Everybody keeps saying Matthew Stafford is now a Hall of Fame quarterback.
Flat out, no, he's not a Hall of Fame.
That's a hard no.
Hard no. I was just having a conversation with my neighbor who's a Colts fan, and the whole thing was the rumors, because rumors about Derek Carr all the time about the Colts trading for him. And I was saying, well, they'd have to give up it would have to be kind of crazy, like a Quentin Nelson or something. And he's like, no, I'd never do that for Carr. No. And I'm like, Stafford got 2 firsts. They got 2 firsts, a second and Goff for Stafford, right?
Right.
Stafford's played 4 more years than Carr. They're on pace for about the same amount of passing yards. No one considered, if Carr goes and wins a Super Bowl, he's not going to be considered a Hall of Famer. Stafford had 2 interceptions in that game. It wasn't like he took them down, made them the Super Bowl winner. It was just he's better than Goff. That's about it.
So by that logic, for these people saying Stafford's a Hall of Famer, if Derek Carr gets a Super Bowl in the next 4 or 5 years, finishes the same stats, Derek Carr's a Hall of Fame quarterback, right?
Right. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It's the same as the ones that think Eli is is a Hall of Fame quarterback. No, he got hot in the playoffs, but he was not that. I mean, he wasn't that good during the regular season. For me, and maybe my standards are a little higher, but has Stafford ever been first team All-Pro? I mean, no.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't had a lot of other accolades outside of this current Super Bowl, right, over his career. And a lot of people say he's played in Detroit. But there's a lot of people arguing or saying, Stafford's Hall of Fame or should be now considered for Hall of Fame after the Super Bowl. And I think I'm on the same, wavelength as you. As I don't really think that he could be considered at this point. Maybe if he wins another one, maybe they go back to back and he has another good season, then we can start talking more about that. But at this point, just because he won a Super Bowl with a really good Rams team, I don't think he's Hall of Fame. So I was curious your thoughts if you've seen that. I mean, I don't know if you've seen that going around.
Yeah, but yeah. Well, it's like, Jim Plunkett's not in the Hall of Fame. He's got 2 Super Bowl rings, right? I mean,
yeah.
I don't think 1 Super Bowl dictates that you should be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, Nick Foles, Joe Flacco.
Right. But Stafford definitely has a lot more yardage, a lot more touchdowns than some of those guys, right? But then I think that Eli argument is interesting because he's got 2 Super Bowls. And, not that great of stats, but at the same time, he's a Manning, right? And so how far does that go in his Hall of Fame voting?
Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, let's look here. I kind of have a sense that Eli had almost 50-50 on touchdowns, interceptions. So let me see here.
He's got to be close. Like he's never
Well,
obviously.
it was 366 touchdowns to 244 interceptions.
I mean, that's definitely not bad. He's been a game man. He's always been a game manager. He's had a good solid teams. I think that he's played with some good defenses, which helped him a lot. So that was his advantage. Stafford's disadvantage was Detroit just never put together a great team around him.
Stafford's only been to the Pro Bowl one time.
Right.
I mean,
I was looking. You see those stats that when people post them and they're like, well, Pro Bowl doesn't matter because he played for Detroit. He's got great yardage and he's got, a good touchdown to interception ratio and wins the Super Bowl. And so, yeah, I just thought that was interesting.
He's got a lot of yardage because Detroit's always losing.
Right. So they're throwing the ball a lot, right? And he had a couple good receivers in there.
Yeah, so, Calvin Johnson, I mean.
So tonight we're talking about the NFL, obviously. One of the first things recently is the NFL Combine. So before we get into a couple of things about the Combine, how do you weigh the Combine? How does the Combine weigh into draft status for these players? How important is the Combine? How much stock should people put into this?
The only thing that I think the Combine hurts the players completely, because I think I guess some players their stock will rise, but it's mostly your stock is going to fall if you don't perform well. Like we had 8 receivers, sub 4.4?
Yeah, so 3.9 or better.
Yeah, and Treylin Burks, who is one of the top receivers coming out, he did a 4.55. Mm-hmm. That's not going to be good. And I think what it is also is preparation, because nowadays all they do is they prepare for months and months and months to run a 40 time. They go to a specialist who teaches them and gets them to run 40 times to make them look really good. And I think if you don't run a good 40 time, that kind of shows. It's like, what have you been doing the last few months?
And, well, there's sometimes where I think the 40 time really elevates, especially receivers who might not be considered great receivers or have a chance of getting drafted at all, or even, in maybe mid rounds, where then they do come out and they run these really good 40 times and they get a little more consideration because of that. So when you say some people's stock rise, I definitely can see that, in there. And then you have the guys who may not run as fast a 40 as they probably were capable of. But if they're really good receivers, they're probably not going to drop too much. They're going to lose a little bit of that. But, we're looking at stats. You see how they performed in college. Are they big game guys? Do they catch the ball? Do they run good routes? How's their football IQ? Those are a lot of things that they're looking at besides the 40 time, but some guys' stock can rise in the 40 time for sure. And then, and sometimes, they can fall a little bit, especially I think from the positions outside of receiver, maybe when you're looking at some of these corners, safeties, I think the DBs get hurt the most by the Combine, especially when you're talking about the 40 time.
Well, I also think running backs are already devalued.
Switch over audio here. All right, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay.
Take that. Yeah, I think running backs are already devalued, but if you don't run a good 40 time as a running back, you're the 4th or 5th round now. I bring up a few years ago, Elijah Holyfield from Georgia, Evander's son. He ran a horrible, a 4.68 40 time, and he dropped significantly.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in depending on how big you are, if you go 4.4, 4.5, you're looking good. If you get anything higher than that, then they're like, I don't know how they're going to make it in the NFL.
Yeah, and so as we're talking about the 40, something that catches my eye every time I see the combine, almost everybody runs the 40, right? But a lot of these guys that run the 40, they don't do the 3-cone or the shuttle. And that always, I don't get that, because I feel like if you run a good 40 and then you run a really good shuttle, like you're just improving your stock at that point, especially at like a receiver or a corner, because that's a big part of that, the agility, the acceleration, the mobility that they have, because you don't have to be the fastest receiver on the league to be great. Look at Cooper Kupp, a guy like that. And there's a lot of guys like that, to be honest. Cooper Kupp just is the most recent example, but you can do great in the NFL by running good routes, being quick, out of your cuts, and being sharp and just being quicker, to the spots. And so I don't know if you've seen that, but all these guys run the 40, and then like half or less do the shuttle or the 3-cone.
Well, that's probably because they don't want, because that's another one. I think that they put more stock in the, because Jordan Davis, the defensive tackle from Georgia, crazy 40 time for a defensive tackle, but no defensive tackle is going to run 40 yards. And so,
right.
But he did the cone and everything, and he did really well on that too. So then, he's got agility, he moves fast, can move around. So that's why his stock is going up so much, is because he has done all those, and they're like, oh wow, he is got all the physical attributes. Sorry, I wanted to go back to one. Elijah Holyfield did a 4.78.
Oh wow.
And he went undrafted. See, and that's what happened. It's like they're probably looking at 3rd or 4th rounder for him. He went undrafted because of his 40 time.
Right. And that's so. As a running back, I think they do put a lot of stock in that, when you're talking about 40 times with running backs, because if you're not a bruiser, if you're not a big back and you're not running a good 40 time, then what are you bringing to the table?
Right.
And I think that is something that they're going to look at a lot. When you're talking about the 3-cone and the shuttle, though, so you have a guy like Calvin Austin, right? The kid from Memphis. So not only does he run an incredible 40, 4.32, but then he runs the top shuttle and the top 3-cone. And now this kid's like, 5'9", 180. Like, he's not a big kid. He probably wasn't going to get a lot of attention. But now I think that almost doubles his stock in the fact that not only can I run a good 40 time, but now I can do the acceleration, the agility, and the other ones that are going to make people look at me in other ways than just a speed guy.
Well, the only thing with that, because I did go through that, is his only disadvantage is he is the only one of those 8 wide receivers under 6 feet.
Yeah.
And they all, they're Christian Watson from North Dakota State, 6'4".
Yeah.
6'4", and he ran like a 4.3, 4.40.
As well as any, Darius Hayward Bay, tall and fast, didn't do him a lot of good.
Right. Well, he's still, I would say, like with Watson, if you get him in the 2nd round, that's a good value pick.
Right.
Well, yeah, Bay was picked way too high, and everyone said that, but he still had a long career in the NFL. Right. He just wasn't
not worthy of that pick for sure.
Right.
What about the guys from Ohio State? When you look at their combine results, like Olave and
Wilson,
they're big time receivers, right? Because of what they did in college. And then again, they don't run the shuttle and they don't run the cone. Maybe they don't think they need to, but they do run decent 40s, but not as fast as other ones. And if you look at the combine ratings, this is interesting to me. They get these high combine ratings, but it's like they didn't really do anything in the combine. So do the combine ratings even matter, right?
I don't think it matters for established. That's like a lot of if you're going to be a 1st rounder, and you're like locked into like, I'm going to be a top 5 pick or whatever, or like those two, them with Drake London, look at those 3 are going to be the first 3 receivers probably. Why would you run all that stuff when you already know that you're going to be one of the first 3 receivers taken?
Yeah.
It just hurts their stock if they go and do that. And then everyone's like, I don't know. It's kind of like you don't want to show the scouts and everything more. You're like, just go off my game tape. That's good.
Right. Well, and I think so. I want to talk about that in a second too. I want to talk about the other ways that people get scouted, but just real quick, the 40 times were pretty fast this combine, right? All across the board. It wasn't just in wide receiver. Right. And there's been some questions about how they're timing the 40s and how they timed the 40s in the combine.
Well, like Tyquan Thornton, at first they're like 4.21,
right?
And then all of a sudden it was a 4.28, and I'm like, how do you get that far off?
Well, there was one that was like 4.51, and then down to like 4 something. And there was a lot of swings up and down. Is the issue that people are talking about? Don't you think that in this day and technology, like we wouldn't need any hand timing? Like it should all be computerized. Like there's
right. You should have like a monitor. Like, dude, like I go to Orange Theory and I have a thing on that tells me what my heart rate and everything. Don't you think it could tell you how fast you're going for 40 yards?
Right. And how much time it took you to go from point A to point B. And that's why this is what bothers me about the combine is there shouldn't be any type of human interaction where they could be changing these statistics and these evaluations for these kids, because it can go both ways. It can look really bad and look really good. And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting is one of the guys was talking about, you look at like a sprinter, in Olympic sprinter, or even any track sprinter that runs the 100, right? They don't run the 10-1 every time. It might be a 10-3, it might be a 9-9. It's back and forth between that. So if a kid runs a 4.5, he could still run a 4.4 in 5 minutes, or tomorrow, or he could run a 4.35 and then run a 4.45, as well. And I think that's another thing when you look at the 40 times and the combine in particular, that's something that, and I wonder, do scouts think about that? Do the teams think about that? And then our average fans, understanding that, hey, this is what it is. There's not a lot of stock in that.
Yeah, I think game film takes a lot of what you want, but then if you're watching the game film and then all of a sudden you see him run a 40, that's a good 40, that makes you like, okay, the game film was correct. Or if they run a bad 40, you're like, what kind of competition were they going against to make it look that way?
Look like they're faster than they were. So talking about game film, the combine, and then you have scout days, you got pro days, are those more important? Should they put more stock on those? Because I know a lot of scouts, they say, hey, the pro day, I want to see what they do on pro day versus the combine. I don't even care if they go to the combine.
Well, yeah, because the pro day is another one where I think it can only hurt you, because that is your perfect scenario. Everything is built around you. Mm-hmm. And if you don't perform well, how are you going to play on Sunday if you can't even do it when it's perfect?
Right.
Like if you're over, like quarterbacks especially.
Yeah, which is why, I think quarterbacks don't do a lot in the combine, especially, a lot of them, they are really focused on pro day. And that's what they are, setting them up in situations that they want to play to their strengths. They want to show them what they can do in those. The other thing about that, so to me, what's your thought? Combine, pro day, if you were a scout, what would you put more stock in?
Oh, man. I would go probably combine, because they're more out of their element and there's more players there. Plus you do the interviews and hopefully you don't ask a bunch of stupid questions too. But I think because the pro day, You go to the pro day and you just watch to see if they mess up. The combine, it's not as structured around what you want. So then you can kind of gauge against other players because they're all there.
Yeah. And talking about the interview portion, you mentioned that, like, this has been a topic for a while, that the guys who perform really well in that portion always do pretty well in the league. And, I kind of think that's due personally to, you're already there, right? If you're at the combine, you're an elite athlete. It's so hard to go from, a high school player to a college player to the NFL. The jump that it takes athletically, physically, mentally, to be a top college player is insane. And so, yeah, maybe the guy ran a 4.5 and the guy ran a 4.4, but if this guy is killing on an interview and way ahead on football IQ, I think that's a huge thing that makes a big difference that I think is overlooked commonly when players come out.
Well, especially if you think about how much more, I would say, more difficult the playbooks are in the NFL. If you have players come in and they go to these interviews and they kind of feel like they're invested and have studied up and trained and gotten ready for interviews. The old adage was, the whole Jamarcus Russell, where they gave him the game film and put money in it to see if he'd watch it.
Right.
And then brought it back, said he watched it, but the money was still in there.
Yeah, that's an old scout trick, though.
Yeah. They did it in that horrible draft day movie where all of a sudden Kevin Costner gets like 3 first-round picks and gives up nothing.
Draft day, right? So talking about the combine, last thing about the combine and just pro days, scout days. I heard a guy, I was watching another podcast, the guy was talking about combine, and I thought he made a really good point. And I was curious your thoughts on this, because I thought it was a good point. Like, it doesn't matter about anything up to the point until they're on the team and they're in those first rookie practices. That's when you really find out what you got. Do you kind of feel that same way, that until you put them on the field with other players of the same caliber on that team, that's when you make your decisions about that player?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think because they already got like the Senior Bowls in those games, I think with peers that have been in the league a while, that you get them in there and see they're not the big fish in the small pond anymore. And so you see it. You've seen it a lot. I mean, how do you have like a first-round pick or second-round pick be a bust? You shouldn't have that.
But it happens a lot. I mean, you've got 4th, 5th, and 6th round picks who are stars.
Yeah. Well, we can just go with the Trubisky draft, right? Solomon Thomas. He's an okay rotational player, but he's not worth the 3rd pick overall.
No.
Trubisky got traded up for. He wasn't worth the 2nd pick overall.
No, no. Yeah, it's a horrible draft.
Yeah, I mean, but these teams were like, "Oh, this guy's going to be the next big thing." And so,
yeah, that's interesting to me. I thought, so how much does all of this matter, right? How much do these combines and the pro days and the scout days, and how much does all this matter?
I don't know. I feel like a lot of times it's about right place, right system.
Right.
And, you could have like a quarterback like Trubisky, who had Nagy as his coach, who didn't know how to use him. And who knows what happens next, where he goes this year, and maybe is he going to be good? Like Jameis Winston left Tampa and he was still kind of throwing interceptions, but he was decent. I just feel like what would Tom Brady have been if he didn't join the Patriots, right?
Right.
I mean, look at Is Roethlisberger better than Phillip Rivers? But Roethlisberger went to a better team than Rivers.
Time to win, for sure. I mean, yeah. If Rivers goes in there, do they still win the Super Bowl? Probably. Maybe they do better.
Right.
Maybe they, Roethlisberger had a great career, but maybe they become a crazy dynasty in those few years if it's Phillip Rivers.
Or if Rivers went to the Giants like he was supposed to.
Yeah.
Instead of Eli.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you say right place, right time, right system, that's probably more important than anything. So, and maybe that's the backside that we don't see is maybe when they're looking at their players, they're really focused on what they want to do, what they're trying to do in their system, and maybe these are a lot for show when you're talking about combines and scout days. So. That's interesting, but it's always fun though. I always love the combine. I love watching that. I don't watch it all of it, but I love checking the updates, and it's always exciting to see who does the most bench and who runs the fastest 40s, and that's always fun. And another cool part is what we said at the beginning is I really think that there are people who gain a ton of stock through the combine that may have not gotten as much look as they would normally have got without it.
Jordan Davis, he's skyrocketing up the draft.
That the man, I already think that he had high value, but the Michigan State running back, what's his name, Walker? Is that Kenny Walker?
Yeah.
He runs a sub 4.4, and he was already a good running back. Like that guy, I think is.
Well, they were saying going to be the first. I think probably the first running back off, but
yeah. So
I don't know. They're not no first round running backs this year.
I think you might see somebody take
Sneak in
with that 40 time, because that's impressive for a guy who runs strong and carries the ball a lot and gets that kind of speed. So
you could see what 5-6 receivers go in the first round.
Oh, it's going to be definitely receiver heavy on the offense for sure. There's some good receivers though.
And then I think there's going to be a lot of reaching on quarterbacks. They're all talking, maybe one quarterback. There'll still probably be 3 or 4 taken in the first round.
I know there will, but I'm not a fan of this quarterback draft. I'm just not. I just don't think there's a lot of people that stick out. And I think the ones that are going to get drafted heavily will be the types where you expect a lot out of them, but they're not going to deliver. It's just not one of the best quarterback drafts I've seen in a while, personally.
Just realize this: EJ Manuel and Christian Ponder were both top 10 picks.
Right. Well, because sometimes you have no choice, right? I mean, you got to take what's available, and you can't just give up unless you're trading back and getting value out of a trade, and maybe some teams do that. But
or you get desperate and you trade for Carson Wentz.
A lot of teams have quarterback needs, which is why I think you see Washington or these teams making moves for some of these guys that it's like, well, because there's not much in the draft right now, let's take a chance on Wentz, especially when you think about Washington. He's only guaranteed money for this year. So if next year they want to then draft a quarterback, they're out really not much for that Carson Wentz trade.
Yeah, that's where like all the pundits were saying, this was horrible for the Commanders. But I'm like you, it's like they didn't give up that much.
No.
And it is. It's if he falls on his face this year, guess what? They have a good draft pick next year, and they can draft a quarterback then. And they can release him and not worry about it.
Exactly.
Or if he figures it out and plays well, then they got their guy.
Right. And he had moments with the Colts where you're like, that's Carson Wentz. Like, this is what he should have been. And then he had, of course, his Carson Wentz moments where, especially near the end of the season, which I think is his ultimate downfall, is that big game playability. Like he's just not clutch. Like he makes some really bad decisions late in games. And late in the season. So I think that's tough, but maybe he figures it out. Either way, I don't think it's bad for Washington. I don't think that's terrible. Speaking of receivers and a receiver heavy draft, so we got Calvin Ridley now on a season suspension. And we were talking about this a little bit where, and I've seen the posts and you obviously seen the posts about the comparison of his suspension versus some other guys. So first, for people that don't understand, Calvin Ridley, receiver for the Atlanta Falcons, basically left the game for mental health issues, and is going to take the rest of the season, or at that time they didn't know how long, but then decided it's going to be indefinite for the rest of the season, and then goes and bets on DraftKings like $1,500, right?
Over the course, it wasn't all right there.
Yeah. Over a course of a few different bets, and then he gets suspended for gambling, and he's not really even an active player, and now he's out for a year. So first, what are your reactions to that scenario by itself? Not thinking about any other scenarios, just Calvin Ridley suspended 1 year, betting on DraftKings and not actively playing in the NFL.
Well, he was still getting paid though, even though he wasn't playing. So he was still under contract. So that's where the problem is in your contract, you're not supposed to be betting on games. And the whole thing is like, I didn't even want to think about football. Then why are you betting on games? If you don't want to even think about football, it's like, what are you doing? I personally have an issue because he's on my fantasy football team. And it kind of messed me up this last year because it's a dynasty league. And I'm like, I needed my receivers, but I understand because of mental health. But now, dude, it's like, come on, you got to be smarter than that. And I think it's just the NFL's like, we're all involved with DraftKings and all of these. And they're like, we got to set an example. And that's what this is. It's an example. That's why you got hit so hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's an obvious example. And the reason I say it's an obvious example is because you look at recent suspensions over the last 5, 10 plus years, there's some stuff that in my opinion, should have meant like banned from the NFL, but got 2 games, 4 games, 6 games, suspensions. So you're obviously trying to set an example by suspending someone for a full year for this gambling issue.
Yeah, let me check. Greg Hardy, how long was he was suspended for 4 games for beating his girlfriend and throwing her on a pile of guns on a bed.
Right.
4 games.
4 games. And Ray Rice, 2 games, right? Was it 2
yeah.
games? 2 games.
I get the Ray Rice is because I hadn't read the room right yet, and that was the first.
Yeah.
Adrian Peterson, felony child abuse.
Right.
6 games.
6 games.
I mean,
there was a couple other ones. Ezekiel Elliott, which that one was a tougher one because it was there was a lot of back and forth with that one, but he still got what?
He got 6 games.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, if they would have given Calvin Ridley 10 games, I would have been like, oh, okay. But like a whole season after missing most of the season already, that's kind of rough.
And now it's basically his career's in jeopardy, where you already walked away for a little bit. Now you're going to get suspended for a whole season. Does he come back at all? And if he does, is he the same top-tiered receiver that he was turning in to be? Like, I think Calvin Ridley, in my opinion, would have been a top 5 receiver this year if he plays the season. And going into next season could be considered one of the better receivers in the league.
Well, that's the thing is he going to be the next Josh Gordon?
Right.
Because Josh Gordon had all the talent in the world and he was showing it, and then he got suspended. And then
same thing. So how many games did Josh Gordon miss over his time for marijuana use? Right.
Yeah.
And he's not beating his child or his girlfriend, or he's not gambling on the NFL. He's doing something that's legal now, like in a lot of states, or it's becoming a normalized thing. And again, it's probably set an example, but you're talking about one of the guys that could have been one of the best receivers in the league easily. Like, he had all the tools. When he did play, he was unstoppable. And his career.
But yeah, now he's back and he's just barely making the practice squad for the Chiefs, who need another receiver.
Right. Well, speaking of Chiefs, another receiver, what do you think about Juju possibly going to the Chiefs?
I've heard that. I thought that was going to happen last year. I thought he was going to go over there. I think that's what he needs, and that's what helped them out. because his best seasons were with Antonio Brown. He's not a number one receiver.
No, but you put him with Tyreek Hill
and Kelsey. Yeah, he's going to do well.
Because, I mean, one-on-one, he's tough, especially if you're not giving him safety help. If you're going to really put him out on an island with someone, that's a tough ask for any cornerback.
But if this is you, though, are you giving Juju the money or are you re-signing Tyrann Mathieu? Because you can't have them both.
Right. And Matthew, he's looking like one of the top sought after free agents at this point. And so maybe you get Juju, though, for a lot less money than other teams are going to go after Matthew.
But he's the honey badger.
Right. No, and it's tough because when you're Kansas City, your focus is offense, right? But then you start giving up really upper echelon defensive players, you're going to hurt yourself, especially against teams like the Bills and the Bengals next season.
Chargers and the Broncos, right?
Oh yeah, well, yeah. I'm going to talk about the Broncos here in a minute too. Before we jump off of Ridley for a second, is this a problem though, more than just trying to set an example, but setting a bad example of the suspensions that they put on the other guys for abusing children, beating their spouses, beating their girlfriends? Like, doesn't that seem like you're not setting a very good example of the kind of ethics you have as a league?
Yes and no. I think the big thing, and it's just because they're setting Ridley as an example, and it's because it's a hard line. They're doing a hard line on this because they don't want someone to bet on a game that they're playing in. You know what I mean? And that's the thing is like, do not bet on games, right? I mean,
well, how about do not beat your wife? Yeah, that sounds like a hard line I'd like to take.
Yes, but that doesn't mess with the bottom line of the NFL. If you start having integrity issues of gambling and throwing games, then that's going to hurt the pocketbook of the NFL, and so that's all they care about.
So they do have an integrity problem because all they care about is money.
Oh yeah, that's all they care about. I mean, you've seen it with Daniel Snyder. It's like, if anything, he should be gone.
Right.
I mean, you have Brian Flores, you have John Gruden, and you got Daniel Snyder. And none of that's going away, but they're not doing anything to it. I mean, the scape, I mean, he did everything was wrong, but Gruden's the only thing that happens to the Commanders.
Right.
Come on.
Well, and that's kind of the question that I have around the NFL right now, because you talk about their race problems that they've been having for a long period of time. You look at these really light suspensions for guys, doing stuff that's not acceptable socially at all. These guys would, definitely get felony charges for the things they're doing, right? And so it's just interesting to me to look at, where is their integrity as a league, and is it time for them to make a change? You're going to put a hard line to stand over gambling. Let's put a hard line to stand over, racism in the league, over, some of this suspensions over these charges that these guys are getting up for these things. So
I think it's as long as the bottom line isn't hurt, they're not going to do anything about it. And they're going to pretend and they're going to do little things and we're like, oh, we do care about this, but they don't really.
Right. Kind of the story of the world, right?
Yeah. The NFL is just a big corporation.
Yeah.
So
they're the same as, whether it be big corporations, our government, the NFL, it's all about money at the end of the day. And again, it's just kind of sad to me that they don't have that level of integrity to say, if we can put a hard line in the sand here, why couldn't we do it here? Why wouldn't we do it here?
Well, here's one. So Adrian Peterson's going to be a Hall of Famer.
Right.
He would never make it in the Hall of Fame in baseball.
Right.
Because part of their thing is the clause about, being a good person. So
yeah,
he'll be a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, there is something to be said about the MLB with that sense for sure. But they also have their own problems years and years ago too. Like they've gotten a lot better. The MLB, they had their problems.
Well, here's one. Have you heard anything about Alvin Kamara? I mean,
oh, right.
That's swept under the rug now.
Yeah. No, yeah, and that, yeah, I haven't seen or read an article, heard anything about it. Probably 2 weeks after it happened. That was probably the last time you saw something on it. So that's again there. Who knows what the thought process is there, but I think you're right. Of course, if it's not hurting their bottom line, then why take real stiff action on it? But you would think that with the evolution of today's society that they have to start thinking about that though, right? Like that at some point they gotta make a few changes on that side to instead of just playing the part, like really acting it, really enforcing.
Well, I just don't know, because with everything that went on this season, the Super Bowl still drew 100 million viewers.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, so they know it's like, what do we need to do anything?
Man, yeah, that's a tough one. So we got into this for a second, so let's move on from this because this is a horrible subject. We got into this just slightly when we talked about now the Chargers, the Broncos, and so the first piece of the puzzle I want to talk about is Russell Wilson. Like, if you're a Seattle fan, like, how sad are you right now?
I don't know. It's hard because they got what, 2 firsts? What did they get? They got
Drew Lock, 2 firsts and a second,
and then like a 5th, but they gave up a 4th.
They gave him a 4th. They swapped a higher pick.
Yeah. And I mean, Drew Lock, he's garbage. Noah Fant, he's decent. Shelby Harris is decent, but I mean, they don't, where they're going, he's probably not going to be part of the team because he's getting up there.
Well, Noah Fant,
let go of Bobby Wagner.
Noah Fant's better than people give him credit for.
Yeah. They got let go of Bobby Wagner. They're kind of going full, and I get it. I don't think this team was catching the Rams, and I think the Rams, the 49ers, and the Cardinals are all moving up, and the Seahawks are kind of on the decline. And I give it to them for realizing that and just saying screw it and blowing it up when they could. I would have, if they were smart, they should have done it last year, because the Bears would have traded Justin Fields and another first and some other stuff.
Probably give them their whole team.
Yeah.
That was the tough part. But I still believe that they thought at the beginning of last year, through the first few games, that they were going to have a good season. And then Wilson gets hurt, and then basically your season's over at that point. And then nobody's going to trade for a hurt Wilson until, he comes back, and then this year. But they still got great value out of him. You're right. I mean, but still, it's tough because, Seahawks fans, right? And I don't dislike the Seahawks. They're close to us, and definitely we've been to Seahawks games. Though their fans are, they really love Russell Wilson, and it's really hard for them to accept a team on the decline. Because they've been good for a while, and Russell was a big part of that. And so.
Yeah, but it was also a big part of it was Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas.
Oh yeah, Legion of Boom, but none of them are even in the league anymore.
Well, Sherman is. Well, I was going to go KJ Wright,
Right.
And then I just think it was when they decided that it was going to be Russell Wilson's team. That's when they started to decline.
Right. Well,
because they won their championship and got to the Super Bowl off a running game and defense.
Right. But they finally now they'll have the receivers to really support him, where they could be his team. You know, so if they hang on to Russell Wilson, let's say they don't trade Russell Wilson, they don't release Bobby Wagner, do they have a chance at winning next season at all? Even if they keep those guys, do they have a chance at the playoffs?
I'd have to see like how the rest of the offseason goes. But right now, I still think they're the fourth. They would be the fourth team in the NFC West.
Yeah, well, it's a tough division.
Yeah.
I mean, so maybe they realize, like you said, they're fighting that uphill battle, and it's time to cut bait and rebuild.
Right.
Does Pete Carroll stay around for this?
Supposedly, I heard that he's re-energized and ready for the challenge. I don't know why. I think he's pretty old, right?
Yeah, he's been around forever. How does this affect DK Metcalf? Is he ready to move now?
I think so. I think the one that cracks me up is Jamal Adams.
Yeah.
He wanted out of a rebuild, and now he's back in one.
Well,
and I think that whole trade is what made them trade Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
Because they gave up 2 firsts for Jamal Adams.
Mm-hmm.
And now one of them is the 10th pick overall.
Right.
And I don't know why you'd give up 2 firsts for a safety.
I think this is their biggest problem now with going into a rebuild is Jamal Adams, because now you gave up so much for him. He's arguably not even their best safety as far as statistically and how they played last year, and he's just going to get worse, and he's going to have a bad attitude. You're probably going to end up getting nothing out of him.
Right.
And so now that you lose there too on the defensive side of the ball too. So, so that takes us over. So that's Russell Wilson. So what does Denver get out of this?
Well, everyone thinks now that they're going to be the team because they got their quarterback. It's still now he went from the toughest division now to the toughest division.
Right. I mean, it's just as hard over there, right?
Yes. It's like the last 3 or 4 years, I feel like everyone's like, oh, Denver's a quarterback away. Denver's a quarterback away. I don't value all their players as much as everyone else does, I think. I still think they're either the 3rd or 4th best team in that division. I think it's Kansas City's division still.
Yeah.
But I could see Chargers, Raiders, Broncos. It wouldn't surprise me any of them in any order.
Well, I mean, Raiders, the only other one made the playoffs, right? So Chargers and
well, they made the playoffs with a horrible, messed up season too. So It's kind of like what happens on a normal season.
Right. And they're improving. They have young guys. They're getting better. And so here's the other problem for Denver is the Chargers now add Khalil Mack, which it doesn't matter how well he plays. That is a morale boost for their defense and for their team, right? It's like adding Von Miller to the Rams. You know, even where and maybe Mack is a little bit more re-energized because of it, because he's going to a younger team on the rise, has a lot of potential.
He's never had someone like Bosa on the other side from him.
Yeah, I mean, geez, now what are you going to do? I mean, because everybody says Mack's old and he's slow. He had a couple of injuries, but it's still Khalil Mack.
Well, and then if the rumors are true and the draft pundits, they're trying to say that the Chargers are going to get Jordan Davis in the draft.
Right.
Imagine that.
Yeah, that's an unstoppable line, or a rush, a pass rush.
And then Herbert will have Allen and Williams back. Their offense is going to be great.
Yeah, so they just re-signed Williams to a big contract, so he's going to be happy. Keenan's going to get his catches. I mean, that's I don't know that this move for Denver puts them in the position to win that division. I don't know.
Well, that was like, if you had to bet a good chunk of money, would you either bet on them missing the playoffs or making the Super Bowl?
No, I mean, I if you would just playoffs versus not, I would still bet them to not make the playoffs. Not even Super Bowl. I'm just saying, playoffs or not, I would still, if you gave me 50-50 straight money on that. I would take not make the playoffs. So I don't think it was the best move for Denver as far as what they gave up. I think Noah Fant's better than he gets credit for. I think you're looking at some draft picks in the future that you don't know how good they could be. Russell Wilson's a good quarterback. Their offense is going to be strong. Sutton and Judy and Alexander, like these guys are good, and that Javonte Williams, he's coming around.
Yes.
Melvin Gordon's on the move. So now they're going to say, hey, Williams is going to be the star there at running back.
Well, they might even resign Gordon to be like the split still.
Right.
They also got they drafted Hamler also.
Right. And KJ Hamler. Their offense could look strong, and Russell Wilson could bring out the best in them. So maybe they give that little KC vibe of being real hard to stop on offense. But we'll see. I've always liked Russell Wilson, and I hope he does well. You're right, though. I think you went to a really tough division, and so we'll see how that plays out for him. Talk about Khalil Mack moving, Carson Wentz moving, and then obviously Aaron Rodgers staying, looks like, right? And then they franchise tag Adams.
It's been a bad week for the Bears, Steve.
Trust me. But speaking of the free agents and the Bears, do you re-sign Allen Robinson?
I think he's gone.
Yeah.
I think he gets more somewhere else. The Jets, the Raiders, someone like that will pay big money for him.
Well, they're freeing up money, right? You get rid of Mack, you free up money. There are some good free agent receivers that are going to be available, to come in.
Well, there kind of was, but they're kind of Williams got re-signed, Adams got tagged, Godwin got tagged.
Right.
So you're looking at Allen Robinson, who you already had as a Bears, or DJ Chark, who's coming off an injury.
Yeah, and Chark's, I think, looks like their top sign. If they sign a receiver and let Robinson go, I think they go after Chark. But I also think that because there's a couple good offensive linemen, and I think that they're going to spend some of that money on the O-line because they want to be a running team for sure. They got Montgomery back there. If they can get a couple offensive linemen in free agency, I think they feel a lot better about that as well.
They can pick up a receiver in the second round too.
Right, and because he's going to be a number one. Mooney's coming into his own. They got good tight ends. And so they go for one of these because it's a deep draft in the wide receiver area. So maybe they go that way. So Green Bay tags. So the other interesting thing I thought about the franchise tags was tight ends. Like what was it? 3 tight ends got tagged?
It's because it's lower cap numbers.
Yeah.
Because it's the whole Jimmy Graham, like I'm actually a wide receiver, but I'm getting tagged as a tight end. Mm-hmm. And that's where like Gesicki, I mean, he's more of a, most of the tight ends, huh?
Gesicki's absolutely a receiver.
Yes. See, and that's the thing is they're tagging these guys that are more than like a receiver than a tight end because they can not pay him as much.
But there are a couple good tight ends though hitting free agency. Evan Ingram, OJ Howard, Schultz got tagged though, so he won't be in there. There's still somebody else, Zach Ertz, he'll be as well. So there's some good tight ends out there for teams that need tight ends. So that was interesting as well. Free agency wise, any big free agency signings that you can think of? Like, what do you predict of anything big happening? Any moves?
It's always also hard. I want the Raiders to either re-sign Hayward or get J.C. Jackson.
I can't believe J.C. Jackson's a free agent.
That's always scares me. When the Patriots don't re-sign someone, that scares me.
I mean, the guy's top 5 in interceptions.
I know.
In the league, right? He's young. He's a good sized cornerback too. He's not small.
Look at the Raiders because it's Patriots West, right? Getting him and Gilmore.
Yeah, maybe they're both going. Gilmore too, right? I mean, Patriots what? We don't need corners. So yeah, I think JC Jackson for me is a big one. Like, where's he going to land? Like, he's going to get some money for sure. The interesting, you were talking about Trubisky earlier. I wanted to circle back to that. So we're being looked at by Pittsburgh and the Giants. Are those good fits for him? Based on what you were saying, maybe he does find a team that fits where he can come back and be that number 2 overall pick.
It'd probably be the Giants. Because that's Dayball. And he was with Buffalo, so he knows Trubisky. Trubisky's more of like a Josh Allen.
Right.
I wouldn't trust him at the Steelers offense. I don't want him throwing the ball like 30, 40 times a game.
Well, Steelers got Najee Harris, though, who had a great rookie season. Yeah. Maybe they turned their game plan a little bit. But yeah, I really, when I thought about that, when you said that, because I was already thinking that Trubisky, he never played bad for the Bears. He never played great, and then he didn't get a chance after that. Obviously in Buffalo, he's not going to beat out Josh Allen. So maybe he gets on a Pittsburgh or a Giants, and he plays well. I saw a funny stat about him. He's the only quarterback that has so many starts that have never thrown a pick six. So it's like 200 game starts or something like that. Wow. He's the only one in NFL history to never throw a pick six in that many starts. And so I thought that was an interesting stat. So maybe Trubisky becomes a quarterback who fills a spot for one of those two teams. And Daniel Jones, that's a big. I think that's why I think Pittsburgh might be an option, because now you got to compete with Daniel Jones over in New York.
Yeah, they didn't pick up his option, so Daniel Jones done. They don't want to waste any time with him, because if he plays well, then they have to pay him an exorbitant amount of money.
That's interesting.
I would like to see Jameis Winston with the Steelers.
I think that's a good fit. I think they should. I think I would do that if I was the Steelers. I'd go after Winston. Yeah, that's a really good fit. Yeah, I'm excited for the free agency this year. There's a lot of good free agents. There's some depth in free agency this year. Some of the older people that I think it was helpful that guys like Von Miller got picked up by the Rams, wins the Super Bowl, because it brings a little bit more stock back into these guys who've been good players, solid players, or Pro Bowlers.
OBJ.
Yeah, for most of their career, they're getting a little older, but at the same time, they're still good players, and if you look at the free agents out there, there's a couple of them that are in that same position.
Yeah. I mean, Calais Campbell is a free agent.
Yeah, Campbell,
big pickup.
Right.
Bobby Wagner's out there now.
Well, that was the other one I was going to mention. I was like, what happens with Bobby Wagner? Because I don't think he's done by any means. I think he's still one of the top, if not the best middle linebacker in the league. I mean, where does he go? And who really spends money on him?
The crazy one, and this would be insane, was I heard the 49ers.
Oh, geez. Because their off defense isn't good enough already, right?
Put him with Fred Warner.
Right. It's like the old Saints.
Yeah, and then he could stick it to the Seahawks like Sherman did.
Yeah. No, I mean, and 49ers, they're not strapped for cash by any means, because they're not going to re-sign Garoppolo. So where does Garoppolo go?
Well, Garoppolo, he's under contract. So he's not a free agent.
Well, so he's got one more year?
Yeah.
So that's why they're looking at the trade.
Right.
Trying to trade him versus
because I don't think he will hurt their cap as much. Let's see, what are the 49ers cap wise?
Does he have because it depends on his contract. If he's
49ers are right now $5 million over the cap.
Yeah, so they have to get rid of Garoppolo on a trade.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's not going there. There's no way Wagner's going there because nobody's going to take Garoppolo. At least right now, I think everybody's going to wait for him to become a free agent.
This is the crazy one, and it's all because of quarterbacks, rookie quarterbacks. You have the Chargers with $56 million in cap space.
Well,
The
that's why they
Bengals.
get Khalil Mack.
That was after Khalil Mack, I think. And the Bengals, 48 million.
Yeah.
There we go. That's the one I was trying to think of. Terran Armstead. He's probably going to go to the Bengals. And then you're going to get your left tackle.
Yeah, man. They get to tag Bates, Jesse Bates. They could, if they bring in Armstead and then maybe Wagner. That makes them a serious contender for a run back at the Super Bowl. So they're looking good.
The Broncos have a bunch of cap space still, even with Russell Wilson. So that's big.
But you know, when you look at some of these cap space, so you got to remember that it doesn't last forever when you have these young players, because you're going to either pay them or lose them when they come up to those 4th and 5th year options.
Well, that's why you got to win. That's where the Rams thought with Goff they had to win now, and then they traded him away and still won now because I think cap space is a fantasy, and you could just make it however you want it. I mean, what is it?
Well, it's not like the NBA, that's for sure.
Yeah, the Saints are 44 million in debt, and the Packers are 26 million.
Yeah, but that comes from taking those cap penalties from previous years usually.
It was just a bunch of restructuring.
Yeah.
The Rams are 20 million, but they're just going to start restructuring contracts.
So that's interesting. I'm really interested to see where Bobby Wagner ends up. That'll be an interesting move there. But other than that, it is really hard to see where the free agents are going to go, because there are obviously going to be some teams out there competing with lots of money.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Chandler Jones is out there now.
That's the other guy I was thinking about when I was talking about the guys like Von Miller. I saw Chandler Jones on there. There's a couple other guys too that I really thought were they have value, but because of their age, I don't know that they're either going to get the money or the looks that they deserve. So that's an interesting thing to me in the NFL. Do you think that with the way athletes are progressing and the way this is right now, that the age, because it used to be when they hit that 31, 32 age, like they were really declining. But it feels like that's not as prevalent anymore.
I feel like it's more prevalent on the defensive side of the ball compared to the offense, because the defense is reactionary, and I feel like your reactions come down. That's why it's so hard to have good defenses for a good stretch of time. That's why, some play, like KJ Wright this year, everything like, oh, KJ Wright's a free agent, and the Raiders get him, and he barely played.
Right.
And I think it's just like a hard line that comes down. I still think like Bobby Wagner still had like over 100 tackles last year, so I don't think he's coming down. But and it's also injuries. Like Von Miller is still good, but he's been injured a lot the last few years.
Yeah, and look at like Robert Quinn, for example, right? He had one of his best sack seasons. In a declining age for a Bears team,
right?
And so. Yeah, it's interesting to me to see some of these free agents that are good players, some of them Pro Bowlers, multiple time Pro Bowlers, and you just wonder, are they going to get picked up? Or if they do, is it going to be late, by teams that just have extra money?
Well, here, talking about tight ends, and we're talking about old guards. Gronk is a free agent.
Yeah, no, and who do they say? They think he was going to
Buffalo.
Yeah, Buffalo. Buffalo was they said he had a good chance at Buffalo, which would be interesting playing against the Patriots.
I would like him. I know they already have Ushma, but the Bengals.
Yeah.
Put him with Chase, with those receivers, and then
Yeah,
he can block. He's a good blocking tight end too.
Well, the thing that's attractive about the Bengals, I think, for anybody is that they are pretty solid at most of their positions. And so if they can upgrade, at those positions, especially offensive line for sure. But when you talk about their skill positions, there are places where they could add a second or, a third guy into the lineup and really become a lot more effective.
Well, they need a corner because you can't be putting Eli Apple out there.
Yeah, Eli Apple's taking a lot of flack. It's funny because he didn't have a terrible playoffs. He had a couple bad plays and a bad game, but overall playoffs, the guy didn't deserve all the flack he's getting.
Well, he also said that New Orleans food was disgusting, so you can't go there, man.
Yeah. So yeah, he put his foot in his mouth for sure. Cool. Well, let's see. Anything else that we had on agenda? No. Yeah. Let's wrap up here with Coach K. So this is off NFL, right? So we're talking about college basketball. I mean, first, what are your thoughts just in general? How do you feel about Coach K? What did he bring to basketball?
Well, I've never really had an issue with Duke. I know everyone, they have like the I hate Duke, I hate Leitner. People are rejoicing about this, but Coach K, we were 3 when he started coaching Duke.
Right.
That's crazy. Yeah.
He's
the last of the old guard.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess Jim Boeheim's still around, but he shouldn't be. He should have retired too by now. But it's kind of crazy to think of where was Duke anything before him? No,
he definitely made Duke what they are.
Because North Carolina was always good.
Right.
But he made Duke a powerhouse. And he came from Bobby Knight.
Well, that's interesting. Most people don't know that he played at Army for Bobby Knight.
And I think he was an assistant under him too at one point. And that's the thing is, but he was like Bobby Knight, but he wasn't yelling and throwing chairs. And that's sort of like he had that calming presence on the court. And if you look at this is the crazy thing. You look at his all-time greats, they weren't that great.
Not comparatively, right? To
right.
The rest of NCAA.
Yeah, and once they got to the pros, you have maybe Grant Hill and some of the newer guys, right? Mm-hmm. Like Kyrie and not even Zion because he's not even playing.
No, I mean Grant Hill is probably the biggest out of his era, right? To really succeed in the NBA.
Elton Brand. But just think about Dean Smith had Sam Perkins, Michael Jordan, and James Worthy all on one team.
On one team, right. Not a lot of guys, though, after that really were great. But they have Vince Carter, Rasheed Wallace. So they had some good players.
Stackhouse.
Talk about that rivalry to me. When I think about Coach K, I think about the Dean Smith, Coach K rivalry between North Carolina and Duke. And it's hard for me to think about a better rivalry than that. Those two teams going back and forth the amount of years they did, and those coaches going back and forth for the amount of years they did. That, to me, is one of the best that it gets. It doesn't get any better than that in any sport.
Right. For longevity, yeah, those two going back and forth. And then Dean Smith retires and they bring in Roy Williams. And It's still like back and forth. And it was like you didn't know who it was going to be, either Duke or North Carolina. And he sprinkled in Wake Forest a few years, Maryland a few years, but it was usually always Duke or North Carolina.
So you think about what he accomplished, how long he accomplished it over. You said yourself, he had good college players, but not the greatest college players, right? Not the greatest pros. Guy wins 5 national championships. 15, 16, 17 titles, ACC titles. I remember how many was 15 or 16, something like that.
And it could be another one. Who knows?
Goes, coaches the Olympics. They win gold medals there.
You got LeBron wanting him to be a coach. You got
Coach
Kobe.
K the best college basketball coach ever.
That's tough because of what John Wooden did. It's hard to argue against Wooden. I mean, how many games in a row did they win?
Right. But look who he had on his team. At the time, that was pretty unfair.
But would you consider Nick Saban the best college coach ever for football?
I mean, it's almost hard to argue.
And then look at all his players he's had. I mean,
he's had
that's why I think.
Well, that's why I'm saying I think Coach K has done more with less in some senses than a guy like Saban, for example.
Right.
Definitely, when you look at what Wooden had for the time period in that era, he had the most dominant players around.
He's a 10-time national champion.
Right. Yeah. And there's like 10 in a row, so it is. So yeah, Wooden, obviously they call it the John Wooden Award for a reason. But they'll probably have maybe a Coach K award, right? I think there's an argument for him, though. I guess what I'm saying is I do think I don't know if I would say he is either, but I do think you could argue it.
So Wooden had 664 wins and 162 losses. And Coach K a lot more games.
Yeah.
Well, he has 1,196 wins. So, yeah, I mean, I could see.
That's a lot of wins.
Yeah.
Wow.
13 ACC regular season and 15 tournament.
Wow.
And 12 Final Fours.
Yeah, ACC tournament. And I mean, arguably the ACC tournament's the toughest tournament out there.
Right.
So he's done some great things as a coach. And I think he's a coach to be respected. I think he's always been good to his players, good to his teams, good to the school, which I think says a lot about him. You got guys like Bobby Knight, who one of the greatest basketball minds ever, but I don't think he represented himself like Coach K has.
Right.
And so that's what I think makes Coach K a little better in my mind than guys like that. And then also when you take his amount of wins and titles and everything he's done, it definitely, I think you can make a really good case for him being the best college basketball coach ever.
Yeah, I can see it. For the longevity, 40 years, that's a long time.
Yeah, and the guy looks like he's same age as I mean, he's got to dye his hair, right?
Yeah, he's got to.
Because he still looks like he did in the 80s.
All that money he's got, probably, right?
Right.
All that booster money.
So that's interesting. That's a good segue to talk about, coming up podcast. We'll be talking March Madness. It's championship week right now. Some great games going on. Baylor loses. I mean, that was but obviously they're still going to the tournament, and then they're make a deep run. But
U of O lost, Florida lost.
So
Florida's not making the tournament. U of O is not making the tournament.
So things got a little upside down. USC's looking strong. Arizona's looking strong.
Portland State might make the tournament. Who knows?
That'd be crazy. But yeah, and so I can't wait to get into March Madness in a future podcast here. So final thoughts, NFL, free agency, trades, anything to look forward to for this coming season?
Well, it's going to be crazy because baseball's back. Their free agency is going to be going on. NFL free agency is going to be going on. March Madness is going on. You got golf is back.
Right.
It's going to be crazy amounts of sports.
Yeah, Masters is one of the first ones coming up, so that comes up in April. And then basketball will be finishing out their NBA's finishing out their season, right? So they'll be going into that summertime.
76ers shut the bed today.
Oh man, and it's so funny because the whole thing with Ben and getting booed, and then your team just does horrible. Like, man, you can't blame everything on Ben. I know he has his issues, but it's
dude. When Durant gets mad, you don't want to mess with Durant.
Yeah, no, he's obviously one of the greatest scorers we'll ever see.
He's I love him so much. He's so petty that anything that irks him like that, it's almost like he's not the same, but it's almost Jordan-esque where he needs that, like, oh, you're going to say this, you're going to talk trash about this.
Yeah. No,
you want to leave my team? I'll show you, James Harden.
He gets fired up, and I think he plays best when he is fired up. You've seen it with Westbrook and him going at it after they left Oklahoma City, then playing against each other. And they'd get fired up all the time after Durant left, and they went back and played. So
right.
You're right. He does need that, and he plays a lot better when he's in that situation. And so, yeah, NBA will be exciting. Just, on the NFL side of it, this is kind of like the prelude to what I feel is like the beginning of the season, and they kind of have that break in the middle of the summer, and then the season starts. So this is the last exciting time for the NFL for a little bit, and I think it's something good to watch. I think the draft coming up and the free agents that are out there and the moves these teams will make are really going to set the stage for another really exciting season. I really was excited the way the playoffs finished and how just it felt like it was back. I was a little down on some of the seasons, especially when the Patriots were dominating, and it's just it got to a point where it wasn't as exciting. And this season really changed that. And I think
it was nice to have a fresh Super Bowl where you had, yes, the Rams were in there a few years ago, but it was nice to see Rams Bengals and not like.
Well, and a new look Rams, right? With Stafford and Von Miller and OBJ and Cup doing amazing things. And yeah, you're right. It was super fresh. So again, just excited to see, what happens over the next couple of weeks in the NFL for sure. And the draft coming up. One of the most exciting things is the NFL draft to me. I always love to see, how that plays out and how well the scouting did and where these guys land. So good stuff. All right. Well, another great podcast, HSC Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Please leave comments if there's anything else you guys want to see or comments on our actual podcast. We got March Madness coming up. A couple other things on the list too. Hopefully we'll have Fresh Wes and Big Mike back. They're both out, but we've got some different topics we're going to hit over the next few weeks as well. If you're into barbecue and smoking, we'll try to get one of those ones in there as well.
I want to learn about that stuff. Come on. Give me some tips.
So I got one plan for that. And then and hopefully we can get the Single-Handed Sailor on as well and go through some of that with Dustin. So lots of cool things happening. So like and subscribe. You're going to want to see these next ones coming up. And then as always, Big Box Steve on the mic. We've got Big Smooth Derek. We will see you guys next time. Thanks for liking and subscribing.